Welcome to episode 7 of the AFA Genxt Podcast. My name is Ashley Mahadia, the New South Wales Chair for the Genxt Community of Practice, and your host for this episode. A big thank you to the AFA for allowing us to host this podcast, and to our supporting partner, Advice Intelligence, for powering this episode. Poverty is a daily reality for millions of Australian women 55 and over. There are many compounding factors contributing to this sad reality. Lack of superannuation, working part-time or casually through long periods of time, and gender pay gap are a few examples. In 2021, the gender pay gap was 14.2%, meaning that on average, women earn $260 per week less than men. In this episode, we speak to Dawn Thomas, National Chair for the Inspire Community of Practice, and Catherine Hayes, New South Wales State Director at the AFA. We discuss how financial advice can be a catalyst in improving women's economic security in Australia. Dawn and Catherine, welcome to the AFA Genxt Podcast. I really look forward to hear your views on how financial advice can help women in terms of their economic security.
Thank you for having us on, Ash.
Yeah, great to be here.
Right, let's get into it. Dawn, what do you think of women's economic security currently in Australia?
Yeah, I think we all know it's not where it needs to be. And I think some helpful stats to talk about is, I think we all know about the superannuation balances. On average, women's balances are about half of that of men. And if they're self-employed, that's even lower. And we've got a big issue that life events have actually caused that superannuation balance. For example, a woman taking 6 years off work ends up losing about $77,000 in their superannuation balance. So we have this huge issue of a lot of unpaid caring duties for women, translating to not being rewarded in a financial sense to their life. And it's no surprise that women are the fastest growing demographic of people living in homelessness. So if you're single and above 55, not good news. And when you think about things like breastfeeding, 40 million liters of breast milk a year, that's about $3.6 billion that we don't talk about, that women contribute. It's this unpaid liquid gold that we give to our community. And sadly, we've also got abuse. If you think about 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic violence, 1 in 4 have experienced emotional abuse, and 48% of those women that have experienced emotional abuse have experienced financial abuse. And that's affecting over 800,000 women a year. So Ash, thank you for this platform. I think there's a lot more we need to do.
Pleasure. Catherine?
Yeah, for me, when I think of women's economic security, I really break it down by age groups because it varies drastically. I'm with Dawn in that one of the things that concerns me the most is that women are in the fastest growing area of homelessness. And that is in that sort of that pre-retirement years. And you would almost, no one goes into their working life thinking, I'm going to spend all this time working, raising children, only to end up with nothing or less than nothing. It's just, nobody plans for that. And it is a range of factors. It's a superannuation guarantee. It has existed since the very first day that I worked. However, for, say, my mother's generation, it's a very different story. And as Dawn said, you've got years of unpaid work. You've also got women are more likely to be the part-time carers, so you've got reduced earnings. So there is a whole bunch of issues that have created this perfect storm. But then again, I look at, say, women now in their 20s and early 30s, and they are some of the most engaged people with their finances. And I have really high hopes for what their future looks like by the time that they are 50 and 60. So it's a very different story depending on which area that you're looking at.
And do you think that women get the same share of attention during the financial planning process? Catherine?
I would say, being a female advisor myself, I predominantly, my clients are women, and even when they're not, my demographic of people being in their 30s, they are the ones asking the question. It's very clear that they're in charge of the budget. It's happy wife, happy life scenario. They know what they want and they're going for it. So, but I know that has not traditionally been the case. So I think that if a female isn't feeling comfortable with the financial advisor, that needs to be, they can't be swept under the rug. It needs to be brought up. But I am seeing a increased level of engagement from women in the financial planning process, which is really encouraging.
Dawn?
So there is a reason, I think, that Zurich released this stat about 40% of women who have lost their husbands left their financial advisors. I think that stat kind of speaks to the kind of attention more broadly given to women through the financial advice process. I think, not to generalize, but I think female advisors knowing how it feels about being placed in that seat, probably in their everyday lives, about maybe not getting equal attention, they're quite focused on making sure both parties, if we're looking at a couple, are actually feeling seen and heard and understood. But I fear on a more broad level, it's still happening in our industry where the main income earner gets a lot more attention, gets a lot more say. I've seen certain advisors shut down women who, let's say, might want to be going to ethical investments because they're told, no, you're silly. That's not going to earn as much. And the conversation ends there. So there's not a lot of let's encourage you to be part of this conversation. I think more on a general sense, we need to be aware of if we're dealing with two people in front of us, to give them equal attention, communicate to them in the way that's needed. And I think the financial planning process at the moment is not there yet consistently across the board.
And how can financial advisors address the gender gap in the provision of financial advice? We'll start with you, Dawn.
I think there's a lot of gender bias in our process. Sometimes if you even think about the software that we use, it's the easiest thing to go male first, female second, client one, and then partner, and it already starts there. And then I know sometimes when I put it in, I switch it around. That confuses a lot of people when you do something as simple as switch around the clients in terms of where they actually sign. And if you even think about that process of a signing page and how that goes, even that arrangement, I would like to challenge that it doesn't always have to be the case, because it's the most simple thing for administrative purposes. Think of the clients in front of you. But also, I think financial advice can be very focused on, can we get them the best net outcome financially, right, in terms of numbers? So that might be tax saving strategies for the main income earner through things like superannuation contributions. But what happens to the partner where their super is not being boosted through the process as well? The Code of Ethics calls for us to actually look at broader impacts of our financial advice. We know that the rate of divorce is 50%. So in our meetings, are we considering that partner where we haven't built them up with their super, haven't spoken to them about their career progression, the gender pay gap is still about 14%, are we talking to them about that? The impacts about taking time off, are we having these conversations boldly in our process to help look at both clients again and narrow that gap of their individual outcomes in the future?
Catherine?
For me, as far as addressing those gaps, I think one of those ones is, obviously more female financial planners. I think that is worth encouraging, because some women do prefer to work with women. So making sure that they've got someone that they can relate to. Genders are a part of that, but it's certainly not the only part. But having someone that you feel comfortable, that you can express your concerns or anything that you might feel anxious about in terms of, or maybe, I'll be laughed at or made to feel silly, like Dawn commented. You need to have that sort of safe environment. And if that means having a different, a range of personality types and genders in your office, I think that's part of it. Another element too is, yes, there has to be consideration of strategies that isn't just about looking at the whole, but looking at the individual aspects as well. Something that I'm really big on is that women, generally speaking, as far as being the carers, take on the lion's share. And I don't know what the word is. Sometimes I call it reverse discrimination, where you've got, we're constantly pushing for women to have, minimizing the pay gap, more recognition of their value in the workplace. But I sometimes feel that we lack in that we don't provide the same support to men as far as their domestic duties. Like some men get ridiculed for want to be a stay-at-home dad by their employer and their social peers. And one of the best things you can do to enable women to chase their career and their dreams and be the breadwinner is also to make sure that you're supporting men if they want to take on those duties, because you can't lift one without raising the other. Otherwise, it becomes out of balance and it's not sustainable. So I think raising opportunities for both across domestic and career fronts is really important, because I know some men who would love to be stay-at-home dads but feel that their employer would not support it because it's not considered normal for a dad to be as involved. And we are seeing that change. So I think, as I said, looking at the couple from a whole, I think, as well as an individual, is really important.
Thanks. And what type of resources can women access to help them manage their resources? We'll start with you, Catherine.
Yeah, so to help them manage their finances, obvious one is you can work with a financial advisor. That's one area. But I think there is a lot of groundwork people can do as individuals before they meet with an advisor. We live in such an information-rich society these days. I mean, I remember as a kid, if I wanted to learn about something, we had an encyclopedia and it was whatever was there. So I no longer have, Encyclopedia Britannica. So if I want something, the internet, there's so much information. There is obviously some misinformation out there too, but you have community groups on Facebook and other platforms. There are podcasts, there are books. There is so much information that you can use to deepen your learning. And so I think there's never been a better time for self-learning in that space with some really reputable sources.
Dawn?
Yes, I agree with Catherine as well. There's a lot of resources out there, and it seems to be like the thing is the first step, like the first step seems to be the hardest. And after you find out that there's so many resources that are easy to understand. I'm so proud of our financial planning industry in the way that there are a lot of advisors who have stepped up in different ways to provide these resources as well. So just to mention a few, you've got Tim Henry's The Grass is Greener podcast. You've got Genevieve Frost with The Reality Check. You've got Julia Schottinghouse, The Good Money Habits. So I frequently actually send out links to these podcasts to my clients as part of easy listening, but even prospects. They may not end up as clients, but they've got those resources because, look, you can listen to those things in your car and gain knowledge. There are amazing books. Again, you've got financial advisors who have released books. You've got The Money Sandwich, you've got The Joy of Money, and they form seeing clients. They understand that there's a way to communicate. And I find these finance books are more inclusive than some of maybe the more well-known ones because they're less dictative, they're more collaborative. So I would say maybe look at these, get it from the library if you don't want to buy them, because the library will be more than happy to bring it in for you as well. And in terms of financial abuse, Financial Toolkit is a really important resource for women, especially. It's a national resource that women can actually access online to find out, how they can get out of a relationship and then rebuild after that. So a number of resources, and Money Smart as well. That's what your taxpayer dollars are going for. So go and use it. Go and use these resources.
I'd like to ask you a question about how we bring factors like the gender pay gap or the lack of superannuation for women into the whole fact-finding process. How do we make it normal for advisors to ask those questions? We'll start with you, Dawn.
I think maybe back to Catherine's point about having more women in the industry. I think when we have more diversity in the process for younger people to actually view, I think that's when the best learning actually happens. So if we're having advisors fronting up to lectures for the young people coming in, mentoring, things like that, I think you'll see that if you have a broad range of approaches, especially if female advisors are coming in from a perspective as a woman, they've got certain little tips and trips about how to make that process more meaningful for those clients. So I would say that if we're trying to help people out, getting more women in and getting them to share how they do their process could be a great way to just expand that learning material that we have in the industry.
Catherine?
Yeah, I would say I look at the financial planning process and the industry itself as it's constantly evolving. And, you wouldn't want to be using the same fact find that you were using in the 90s. It's just like not only just the format that it's delivered in and how you obtain that data through to the questions that you may ask. It needs to evolve as you do. And that can only be done with experience. And of course, you can leverage off your own experience, but the experience of others as well. Or even reach out to a client and say, hey, what could have been made easier about this process? Or what questions could I have asked you, which would have helped you understand what I needed from you to be able to give you the outcome that you needed? So I think lots of reflection and experience, and don't be afraid to give it a try. And if it doesn't work, adjust it or move on to something else. But I think it's that commit to constant learning and improvement. And even if it's just little 1 to 2%ers.
Do you think we should have different fact find documents for men and women?
No.
Dawn?
No, I don't think, because a fact find document is just a tool to collect information. I suppose that's how we use it in our office, because the other tools that happen in the meeting, like your whiteboarding, your presentations, whatever it might is, I think that's where you're amending it for the client that's in front of you. Whether they're male or female, whether they're more visual learners or kinesthetic learners, I think the process is doing that. And then the fact find is I don't know, Catherine, would you say that's more like collecting information?
Yeah, I mean, the way I run my process is I get clients to complete a fact find ahead of the meeting, but I am a very visual person and I'm a kinesthetic learner. So I have a second fact find, which I use in front of the client. And that is enabled me to specifically draw all over it. And I have people constantly, oh, can I take a picture of that? That's I understand it now. So it's already being tailored to them. And that's not a gender specific thing. That's just the individual themselves thing.
Thank you. Right, so let's move on to the next part. And I would like you to spend a bit more time on the last 2 questions. How do we bring more women to a career in financial advice? We'll start with you, Catherine.
Well, I think it's important to note that the industry itself has historically been blokes, and it is still largely made up, but that has been steadily changing, and more women now are studying financial planning than men are. So I think that's important to recognize, but whether those people studying actually translate to entering the career with the challenges that we have with the barriers to entry, that's another thing altogether. So, and a career in financial advice is so diverse these days. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow the expected transition of client service officer to paraplanner to associate advisor to advisor. That paraplanning in itself is becoming a huge career in its own right, and people used to assume, oh, of course you want to be an advisor after being a paraplanner. That's not the case anymore. And I think one of the best ways to bring more women into the industry is we need to think about what is it women value in their day-to-day work. And for me, I think that especially what COVID has shown is that financial planning, you can meet with clients over Zoom, if that's something that works for you. Paraplanning is incredibly flexible if you have small children. As long as you can work to a deadline, you can choose the times and hours of the days that you work a lot of the time to get it done. So it really does need to speak to the benefits and the flexibility that can exist, at least in certain occupations within the industry itself. It certainly does come with challenges. Somebody told me when I was first starting, back in the early noughties, they said, just a heads up, if you love continuous learning, this is a job for you. But even so, there may be some times where you hate it because of the continuous learning. And that's rung very true. There are times when the legislation moves too fast and you're like, oh, I'm chasing my tail. Or at other times, I find it engaging because it means there's new opportunities, new strategies, new ideas. I can add value to people because things aren't static. So whatever it is that appeals to women, and that could be broader as an individual, just focus on talking about that. It's like women become, might become a nurse because they want to help people. And I think it's important. Financial planning is your financial health. It may not be your medical health, but it is a really good career for people who want to help others. And, the number one cause of divorce in Australia is financial stress. I became a financial advisor because my parents were terrible with their finances. And I thought, I want to learn everything I can about money so I don't experience the same stresses in my life that they did. So I think finding that motivation, whether it's personal benefit, flexibility, financial incentive, the ability to go into business for yourself, all of these things can be promoted to encourage women to enter the industry.
Dawn?
I think we can get in sooner to universities, really work with them more collaboratively to show the diversity that exists in the industry, and even diversity, like what Catherine was talking about, that there's so many different ways of providing financial advice, but also we all kind of operate a little bit differently based on, the people that we attract to us as well, So I think if students can see themselves in someone else who's already established, I think that gives them a sense of what their future can look like. And maybe we're not there yet in terms of being highly visible. I think we're trying, we're trying to get in there, but financial planning probably at university doesn't sound as stable as accounting, So, how do we change that perception as a whole? I think overall the industry, as we lift our standards and improve our reputation, I think we're going to be known for that really people focus. So people who are focused on people would be attracted to it. Also, if you think about overall the conversation that is happening now about workplace safety for women, they are entering a workplace dynamic where there's a lot of power inequality in the financial planning world. So I think we really need to hold each other to high standards about keeping women safe at the workplace, so from bullying, sexual harassment, any of those things, because that's an additional challenge that might push them out. I know personally of women who are exiting the industry because of toxic environments. So we need to support our women better, our LGBTQ plus communities better. We need to be able to be more accepting and also be able to take action against people in the industry if that's called out. I don't think that necessarily happens. They make it still, like other industries, really hard for the victim to come forward to voice it out. So we can't have that. I think we want to be a profession. Let's take these things seriously and help them out. And also, the finance industry still has a 20% wage gap, the worst wage gap out of any industry. And we're financial advisors. So if we're part of that, we're part of the problem. We need to fix that too.
Thank you. Let's fast forward 10 years from now. What would you like to see for women in the financial advice industry? We'll start with you, Catherine.
For me, I'd really like to see, obviously, more women in the industry itself, a higher percentage of women, but specifically also women in a greater role and a greater percentage across broader ranges. So I'd like to see more women who've gone into business for themselves. So I'm a risk specialist. And it's amazing the number of people go, oh my gosh, I don't know any other female risk specialists, so questions like that. So clearly it means there's not enough of us. So more women really going to specializing in their chosen area. And also, more women on, boards for, whether it's insurance companies or superannuation companies. I think there's a whole broad range of increase in female representation across all levels of the sector is what I would like to see. But I also, I just think diversity, because with diversity comes a weight of different experiences, opinions. It becomes more inclusive. I mean, you look at the ASX boards, the companies that tend to have more female representatives on them actually are more profitable and lower staff turnovers. There's a whole host of benefits. So I would really like to see a greater representation through all levels of the financial services sector.
Dawn?
So Ash, I'm going to give you a highly aspirational 10-year goal, which Financing Index has said. They've said it's going to be over 50 years now when we maintain equality. But I'm going to say 10 years, right? Catherine, power of positivity. We're going to put it out into the world that we don't have to be doing a special episode on women's economic outcomes because we've already gotten there. And the financial planning industry is already as diverse as it needs to be and is flourishing. So I hope that in 10 years, again, it's highly aspirational, that all of this becomes less of a topic because we've sorted it out. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My one is that the 20% gender pay gap doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
So your final words, both of you. Dawn, we can start with you.
I wanted to just let everyone know as well, we do have some International Women's Day events that are happening around the country. We've had three released at this point. So Perth is doing one on the 2nd of March, Victoria on the 10th, Queensland the 11th, and we're just waiting for the other states to get there. Of course, understanding what's happening with COVID, it's just making it a bit hard to organize these things. But if I could say on a parting note, find your circles. There are a lot of other women and male advocates who are willing to lift you up. You should never feel alone through this journey in financial planning. There's enough of us around to help lift you up. So if you're listening to this and you feel you don't have that circle of support, there's your Inspire communities. There's people like Catherine. There's there's so many of us that are willing to just lift you up. And Ash, I'm sure Ash wouldn't mind if you gave a call and said, I'm feeling a bit of support. I need a bit of support. So that's my final words.
Catherine?
Yeah, I would just simply say that if you are looking for support, same thing, and you're a female, whether it's in the advice industry or you're a bloke simply looking to be better at working with your female clients, I would say go out there and ask the questions of your clients. Ask, what could I do? Go through that self-reflection process. If you if you feel like you're missing business because you're not able to connect with your female audience. And for women who are working in the industry, if you're not feeling that level of support, we've got such an advisor shortage at the moment that really I feel like, the world's your oyster. If it's not working for you, don't be afraid to go out there and find something that works, whether it means backing yourself or, finding a new environment to work with, or just, be brave and have that conversation with your, the workplace that you're in and saying, look, this is, I would feel more productive, more supportive, more engaged if we could include these elements. But it does start with the ability to be brave and a little bit vulnerable too. But the best outcomes and conversations usually happen from those situations.
Catherine and Dawn, thank you so much for your time on the AFA Genxt podcast.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for doing this episode, Ash. Really, really appreciate it.
We hope that you've enjoyed episode 7 of the AFA Genxt podcast. Please reach out to Dawn, Catherine, or myself if you have any questions about today's episode. Thanks again to the AFA and Advice Intelligence. See you later.